Here comes Slim up the railroad tracks. Say I'm a hard-living, hard times man, I don't look back. Guitar Slim, guitar on his back.
Community Voices is an innovative project to preserve portions of Greensboro's history through videotaped interviews of local people. Stories about the lives and experiences of a variety of residents will provide a valuable supplement to the more traditional tools of history: books, diaries, photographs, documents, letters, and newspapers.
Well, I was born on Smith Street here. In those days, I think I and all of my brothers were born at home rather than in the hospital. Smith Street looked then very much the way it does now. It was a very congenial street. My great-grandmother lived on the street with us, Mrs. Lunsford Richardson. Across the street were friends who were the wives and doctors, wives of doctors and practicing doctors. It was a very cordial and friendly atmosphere there. But I think we had moved when my parents built the house I presently live in. And when I first went to school, we were living in that house. And so I went to Irving Park School, which was a very interesting mix at that time of farmers and people who lived in Irving Park. Well, I think that had a lot to do with the family's attitude toward public service. I know my uncle, Mr. Smith Richardson, has always made a great point of family solidarity, because he said if a family loses control of a business in a area, they lose the ability to contribute publicly. And I think that did help the family to contribute quite a bit publicly. Well, there were a number that were considerably more prominent than our family. The Spencer Love family was one, the Cone family. Greensboro has always been very receptive of Jewish families here, and they've made a tremendous contribution to our city. Well, actually, I was not practicing law in New York. My uncle asked me to work with him. He was head of the Vic Chemical Company at the time for a year. I'm glad taxpayers would be glad to know that, owners of the club would be glad to know that I was not working for selling vapor rub. But he asked me to follow him around when he was setting up the Richardson Foundation, and he wanted to call on what he called the wise men in the country here. And he would ask them, what would you do if you had X dollars to spend? And so I spent a year basically helping him think about how to establish the Richardson Foundation.
That must have been really quite interesting, I would think.
Yes, it was. We went to Washington and visited with Senator George of Kentucky and of Georgia and many other well-known members of Congress.
Right.
Well, my wife's parents both died at an early age when she was just entering high school. Just going shortly in high school. As a result, she moved to Greensboro, where her older sister was living here, who had married Britt Armfield, who was in the textile business. And so she grew up here in Greensboro from the time she was high school student. And I met her there and have known her through that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's always been very active in public affairs. She's been on the board of the University of North Carolina, the big board. She was president of the Junior League, and incidentally, when I was in Congress, she was president of the Women's Wives of Congress. And she likes to go up each year to the president, the president's wife's meeting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Greensboro, well, that time had grown considerably. When I was first growing up here, able to realize what was going on, it was a city, I guess, of 25,000 people. Now it has grown enormously and it wouldn't be recognized. But I think the city has done a wonderful job of growing in the right way. This really is a fine city to live in, with the 3 universities, colleges here. It's got a number of important industries here. It's just a fine city to live in. Well, Fred was from Rockingham, North Carolina. And I went to law school with him. Well, before that, we were on the same destroyer in the war. That's where I really got to know him. And after the war, when I decided to go to law school, mainly because I didn't want to go to work yet, I think, after being in the Army, in the military for 4 years. When I stood in line to check in, Fred was the man in front of me. And although we'd been on this destroyer for 2 years together, neither one of us knew that the other one was planning to go to law school.
How about that?
So I went to law school with him, and then we decided to practice law together here in Greensboro, which we did for several years. His father was a well-known lawyer down in Rockingham, and he had to go back there to help him. And I had the opportunity to be a city judge here on the side. So we sort of went separate ways after that. Well, Randall Jarrell was a well-known poet, and I played tennis with him. I wasn't quoting poetry with him. But as a result, I got interested in his course in modern poetry, and he allowed me to sit in on his class. And he was an absolutely superb teacher. I think I've never had a better one than Randall. And that was a fascinating time, and I think I got a lot out of it. I enjoy poetry now.
Right.
Incidentally, one of his major poems, one of the longest ones, starts off by he is playing tennis on the tennis court that was located across the street from where the Vicks Vapor Rub plant was operating. And this smell of menthol comes across the court and makes him think of a tree in his home. And from there it goes on for quite a few pages. Well, I think when you look back on it, we handled it pretty well here in North Carolina, thanks to our good newspapers, our universities, who made it unfashionable for the real hardcore people to come out of their holes and stop things. But there was certainly a lot of hard feelings about it. I ruled on one of the early cases about it. I've forgotten exactly what the details were. But for my worked there, I had a torch burned in front of my house, which gives you the message that not everybody's happy with your decision.
Right.
That was a big adjustment for many people. I ran for governor shortly after that came down, and while I in the primary, I led by about 30,000 votes or something like that, and things looked pretty good. Then the Civil Rights Act was passed, and I supported the Civil Rights Act. And well, I think that was in 1960.
That's correct.
I was not living in Greensboro at that time, I don't believe. We lived in New York for 2 years. But I'm not sure of that. But I think that put Greensboro on the map, and I think Greensboro responded to it very well. That was a shocker to people in view of our attitude towards those racial matters in those days.
Right.
But it really opened up relations between the members.
Under Sanford.
Well, the reason I got interested in politics was because of my enthusiasm for two people. One was President Kennedy, and the other, particularly important, was Terry Sanford. I respected what he was trying to do for the state. He had a vision of really expanding this state into a lot of directions, he was not the routine politician by any means. I was a federal judge and had a nice lifetime job, and people wondered why I was crazy enough to give it up. But it was because of my respect for Sanford and for President Kennedy. And the idea at that time was that was where the action was. That's where young people wanted to be. They wanted to get into politics. It's hard to realize that today. I hope that that's beginning to come back again, that we are beginning to think of politics as a noble form of work instead of something to be slammed by everybody. But Terry was certainly one of the most remarkable people that North Carolina has ever turned out, I think.
Right.
Well, it was politically touchy, all right. And I really, when it came up to a yes or no vote on the Civil Rights Act, that was pretty hard to work your way through that. You know, you either felt strongly about it one way or the other. One of the problems in politics is when do you respond to what your voters want you to do, and when do you respond to the national interest? And this is certainly a national interest case, I think. Terry Sanford supported that. I think most of the leading newspapers in the state supported it. I think it was the right thing to do. And I was in Congress at the time, and I felt that we should take some kind of positive action on the school system. I went up to see a professor at Yale named Alec Bickle, because I read an article by him in a magazine in which he outlined a plan to approach this problem. And Alec had drawn up, when I got there, he had written up a full bill for Congress. So I went back to Congress, and Alec came down with me. We talked to Morris Udall. He went on the bill. And the lady from, the first black lady from Congress from Texas, Jordan. Barbara Jordan, wonderful person. And the three of us introduced a bill which we thought would be the most practical way to handle things. That bill, parts of it passed in Congress, but we didn't get the entire bill passed. Mo Udall ran for governor. I ran for president, and he used that bill as his platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was basically a bill that emphasized special types of education, that schools would draw people to it because they wanted to go.
Right. Right.
Yes. And I have great admiration for all of those people that you named. They were effective. They felt strongly about it. But they knew how to deal with the leaders in the community without being abusive or without turning them off. I think they did a very good job on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a great city to bring up a family. I was very lucky myself to have a great mother and father. So raising children, I don't take the credit for raising my children. They educate me. But I was just lucky to have people like that. And so I didn't view raising children as any kind of problem. It
Mm-hmm.
just was natural
Mm-hmm.
for me on that.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my children have been very open-minded about things like the racial issue and
Mm-hmm.
politics. Well, I think some of them used to complain about campaigning, where they would go door to door and would get some sharp comments, negative comments about about me. But on the whole, I don't think they suffered too much from it that way. They all were sympathetic for my positions on it. Well, we were both ardent tennis players, and Emily's made sure that she teaches all of our children and grandchildren how to play tennis. So we played tennis. We would also go fishing and swimming together out at Mr. Lump Richardson's farm. Well, I remember that we made some efforts early on to try to bolster downtown Greensboro. And we would do things like put some trees in or some sidewalks. Nothing ever worked because it was going against the flow of things, as the shopping centers' convenience drew everybody away from downtown, which is too bad, because I think downtown does brings people together in the city. But there's no stopping the shopping center development. I hope with things like the Carolina Theater downtown, that and the big Jefferson Pilot building, that downtown may be revitalized sometime, but it's been a losing thing. The automobile wants a place to park, and it finds those out on the shopping centers. Well, the things that were on most voters' minds in those days reflected the economy in this area. It was textiles, it was tobacco, and if you didn't feel that you could support your constituents on those 2 points, you'd do better off not to run for office. Money was not quite the problem, not near the problem that it is today. The first campaign I ran, I think I raised $20,000, or maybe $25,000, which was considered a very good sum in those days. Today, that same seat, I think they raise well over $100,000 to run for it.
Right.
It's just shocking the way that's grown up, and it's causing a lot of problems. Yes, Jim is. He was a great leader with the JCs. He was a natural born leader. He was very helpful to me in my politics. We both entered it as novices, but I think we caught on and were able to get along well in it. Jim did a fine job as mayor of the city when we were having the racial troubles. And without him and without several of his friends in the police department, we would have had some real difficulties then. Well, it was an interesting period. Emily says that she likes people to call me a judge because she makes them feel like I had a job, but actually I've had several jobs and unfortunately couldn't keep any of them, as she would say. But that was my first real experience with the business community. And I was very impressed with the quality of the people that we had leading our business areas here. And it was a real pleasure to get to know them. And I think what I learned there helped me on some boards that I've been on in some industries since then quite a bit. Well, Spencer Love in particular, I knew well because he was a tennis player, and I played tennis with him. And he would invite his tennis friends down to his place in Florida for a long weekend each year. And so we got to know him there. He was an extraordinary man and a person who was a real long-range thinker. I admired him very much. The textile industry has fallen on harder times since he was here, but he brought in good people, and those good people are still there, and I think they'll pull themselves out of the difficulty.
Right.
My father was a close friend of all the Mr. Herman Cone. They lived right around the corner from us. And I've known most of the Cone children, called on the Cone seniors to ask for money for contributions for various occasions. And they were always very generous. They've been great citizens. Well, they were connected usually with the leadership in the city. For instance, that a very good member of the Van Story family, Neil Van Story, was head of the bank. He was also mayor. So you had that kind of relationship. And it was usually a well-known businessman who was put in as mayor. They had the power to put them in. That's changed a great deal right now, since many of our big industries have moved out of town, several of them. And I don't think that business is, well, I think they're beginning to realize through the Chamber of Commerce that they need to work some to make sure we have good local government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And during those days, the old days, it was maybe not quite as democratic as it was now.
Mm-hmm.
But with the leadership of the Spencer Loves and the Cones and the Van Storys and the banks, we had very good government.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Bryan is quite a legend here in Greensboro. He and his connection with Jim Melvin resulted in some very fine parks being given by him. Bryan Boulevard honors him. I called on Mr. Bryan a number of times, asked him for money for worthy causes, I thought. And he could be a pretty gruff gentleman, and you better know what you were talking about when you went in to see him. But he was actually a very fine and warm-hearted gentleman. He loved his dog that he walked around the park every day, and I think the dog was buried with him or near him. He was, each Christmas, he had a Christmas party at his house for all the neighborhood, especially the children. And he would he would sit down on the floor with the children and read the night before Christmas to them, and then give them presents. So we've lost that kind of neighborhood leadership right now, so I hope someone else will pick. Well, I think our Jewish community has been one of the strengths in Greensboro. They back with not only their money, but with their work on just about every good cause that comes along. The Cones opened the way to encourage many other good Jewish families to come to Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been an important part of our city,
Mm-hmm.
our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was there, it was not nearly so critical as it is today.
Okay.
They were concerned about that, but there was not any great difficulty in passing the kind of legislation which they were interested in at that time. Now it's become a flood of imports from the Far East, and it's quite a different situation right now.
Mm-hmm.
None of these studies had come out showing the dangers of tobacco. And in North Carolina, it was a very important part of our economy. And while I was there, I think everyone in the North Carolina delegation supported tobacco. That we just didn't know that we were supporting something that was harming a lot of people. Well, I thought that was a good idea in that it gave people in local communities the feeling that they had a part in what was going on in government. And I think that was a good step forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could point to a lot of things that makes Greensboro a good place to live. One of the things I would emphasize at the outset was our three major colleges here, universities. They bring in a lot of talented people into Greensboro. And it brings in an intellectual level that otherwise we probably not had. We have a fine newspaper. We have fine parks. We're still working hard to protect open spaces. And of course our location here is ideal. You can make a very good Chamber of Commerce speech of why you ought to live in Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
We have good people here, and I think our relationship with our African Americans is probably about the best in North Carolina, and it is open, and there's a lot of discussion going on, not always in agreement.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do a good job in community building. And that's important, about the most important thing you can do,
Mm-hmm.
because it's in communities where you have your friends, also where you have people you have to learn to get along with, where you raise your children. And it's, I think we've got good communities. Well, I think the racial problem back when the Civil Rights Act was first passed, back during that period, was one of our most difficult periods, and we had that one bad situation of several people being killed. And I think that was probably our worst, darkest hour. But we worked through it, and right now we are still having some problems with racial matters involving the schools. And we've had several well-publicized outbursts between the school people and minorities here. But I think we're working through those. I think our most serious problems were ones that most people don't remember anymore, and that was the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
When the banks closed, when we were using scrip for money. Those were pretty desperate times. And young people don't remember that at all. Worked with Dr. Ravenel, got me involved in this hospital that he put together for polio victims. That was a very dicey time in Greensboro. The fear that something would strike, without you being able to do anything about it. But that hospital, I think, did a lot to isolate the problem and to give people confidence that something was being done about it. Well, my family has been divided into really two kinds. One are preachers and professors, and the other side were the business leaders in the family. I was not born again. I was just born a Presbyterian, and had so many Presbyterian relatives that I had to be interested in the church. My number of my grandfathers and great-grandfathers have been ministers here. Dr. Henry Lewis Smith was president of Davidson at one time, and was also a minister. Many of my children were baptized by one of my uncles who was head of the foreign missions of the Presbyterian Church. So my family has always been involved in the Presbyterian Church. We've been fortunate here in having outstanding preachers like Dr. Charlie Myers. The church has always had good preaching, and what we are struggling to do now is to try to bring the church to younger people, young families, and we are providing more facilities for children, Sunday school classes for them. It's been a grand old church, and I think it's had a positive influence in Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a whole group of people in the Young Men's Bible class that distribute food to sit-ins. They're doing a lot of work of that sort. Yes, I think the success of that has certainly surprised me. I remember when we started it, there was difficulty in trying to get focus on what we really wanted to do. And I remember we had one director there who didn't last very long, but you had a...
I think you're thinking of Jim Farr.
Yes, Jim. Well, I don't think Jim did this particular
Okay.
one, but I remember his idea of how you spotted potential of leadership was whether you threw rocks at passing railroad cars. That showed that you were someone to be looked to for leadership. But from that, it has gotten much more technically correct, and it has been outstanding. What I like about it is it not only trains leadership in business, which of course is one of its main things, but it's expanded the leadership training to teachers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's expanded it to nonprofits. And it's one of the interesting things is the military is greatly represented. The leader of our force over in the recent war in the Middle East was a graduate of the Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So they cover a wide range of leadership possibilities. Well, Greensboro has an unusually large number of private foundations here, for example. There's the Mike Weaver Foundation, and there is the Cone similar foundation, it's called. I've been on the board of the Richardson Foundation. There are several of those foundations. I think it must be one of the most unusual cities in the country, I would think, in terms of all of the nonprofits that it has operating here. It has a very fine city foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think perhaps the greatest change, and the best change that we've had in America in the last 50 years is the growth of the acceptance of the woman athlete, the woman chairman of the university, the woman active in business. This has been startling since the early part of the century. And this has been a great thing for, we see women playing tennis. I think my mother, if she ever played tennis, couldn't really play because they had to wear ladylike long dresses. They went swimming in the ocean. They had to wear these long bathing suits that came down over their knees. Now they are playing tournaments in Wimbledon. They're playing soccer. These young girls that play soccer and charge up and down, knock each other down. It's amazing to me. Young women are no longer supposed to just be proper young people. They are very active and aggressive. Well, I think Greensboro has done a remarkable job, one on diversity. We have a very strong, as I mentioned, Jewish population. Now we have many Mexicans, and they are all being accepted. Most of our builders are Mexicans here now, workers in building. The black community and the white community are meeting together now. We're talking with each other. We don't always agree on things, but I think that it's a very healthy relationship. We have fine parks. We have wonderful colleges, which make this an interesting city to be in. I think many of us think that Greensboro is the best city to live in.
Like the Grand Canyon that divides the wrong and right, and the people of my country in my time. In my time, wars played on TV, sound bites on manifest destiny. But all I saw was cruelty and misery, and confusion in the vision of my time. In my time, in my time. Saw 7 horses gallop across the stars in a dream last night. 2 were black and 2 were red and 2 were white. One was of a different color still. In my time, in my time.